Christian, good morning.
Good morning, Marvin.
Do you remember when we first met?
I am not 100% sure. It must have been at the very first wine experience, which I attended, I think. Unless your memory is more precise than me. Did we meet in Bordeaux first? Or?
I think, and we're talking about a long time ago, the 70s, I think that I ran into you in the Seagram building when I was visiting with Ab Simon, and you happened to be either walking in or walking out of his office, and he introduced us together. And I didn't know who you were. You didn't know who I was. I was new in the industry. You had been around, but you were from Bordeaux. And that's my recollection. Now, the wine experience started in 81, so I'm guessing this was in the late 70s.
It makes sense. And dear Ab was such a great friend for all of us. We miss him so terribly. Introduce us indeed. Now that you tell me, I remember. I should have remembered before.
No, yeah. It only occurred to me last night when I was trying to recall, and nobody has mentioned Ab's name in quite some time, and yet I know he was a great mentor of mine in my life, and I know that you and he were very close.
We were very close, yeah.
And I know that he was a great supporter of Bordeaux wine in America.
Indeed.
And very, very special.
And so, with Francine, his darling wife, they were a wonderful couple, an example for all of us, yeah.
So I just want to put that on the table because I couldn't remember. So let's start at the beginning.
Yes.
I must say that in doing research for this interview, you're not easy. For all that you've accomplished, you've led a very private life. And I'd like to start before you were born. Mm-hmm. I understand that your grandfather was a peasant.
Yes.
And if you have memories of him, and then, which obviously your father, the next generation, became a huge success, and you were born into wine.
Very much so.
Tell me about your childhood, your family, and its beginning history.
Well, my grandfather, since we speak of him, was a strong peasant, smart, with a big mustache in those years, and he arrived in Saint-Emilion in 1929 with a big crisis, and he purchased Château Fonroc, a good Grand Cru Classé of Saint-Emilion today, producing wines of good quality, but no more. My father, as a young man in the 1930s, began to sell the wine of his father. His father was producing, and he was very successful, and he began to sell the neighbors, the wines of the neighbors. And then in 1937, he began as a wine merchant, Établissement Jean-Pierre Moueix, in the small town of Libourne, where is still our main office. My father was extremely talented, a very smart man, very silent. And he had the vision after the war that the balance between the wine merchant and the estates was going to change. I mean, and I do remember in my youth, we were dictating the prices to the top estates. And there was a reaction from 1970 on when, at that time, the estate began to decide on the price and the wine merchants had to accept or not their prices. That changed the prices of the estates themselves because they made more money at that time, which means that when my father in the 50s could foresee the fact that the estates, which were worth nothing at the time because people were losing money year after year, so they were ready to give up their estates. He began to invest in estates, even with small means, like Magdeleine in Saint-Émilion, Trotanois in Pomerol, and La Fleur-Petrus in Pomerol as well, which has always been surprising to me. I said, but Dad, you had no much money. How did you purchase those estates? He said, but mon petit, it was worth nothing at the time. So then he played all his life, very beautiful business life, between being a producer, but mostly a wine merchant. And then...
Selling in bulk or selling bottles?
No. Selling, you're right, selling mostly in bottles from chateaus and having a small bulk activity with the basic wines of Bordeaux, which I developed myself when I arrived in the 70s. But his forte was really chateau bottled wines, yes.
And what was Bordeaux like in the 70s when you really started? Were the first growths then, or did they become famous first growths later? Was there a pecking order of any consequence? Was the economy good for them or struggling for them as well?
Well, we should not forget that we faced the main crisis in the early 70s, which we call la crise du pétrole, the gas crisis, which was very severe, which was combined with some major problems in Bordeaux. And then everything was for sale again for nothing. And you have the best example of Chateau Margaux, which you know so well, which finally found a buyer with André Menzelopoulos in 77, but which had been on the market for years. And there was no buyer except an American national distiller. That's another story. So a main crisis in the 70s. We began to recover in 75, 76, and then from 80, and especially with the 82 vintage, Bordeaux was flourishing again. The chateaux, at least, were flourishing, the top chateaux.
So you mentioned the year 1970. Isn't that the year that you really became the manager in charge of Chateau Petrus?
It is true. I returned from my early life, including California.
We're going to talk about California.
I guess so, in 70, and my father put me in charge of the vineyards, including Petrus, which for a man I was 24, was an incredible honor. Probably Petrus was not as well known as it is today, but still it was by far.
That's what I really wanted to get into. In my growing up in the wine world, there was always the first growths, which are in all the books, and then there was Chateau Petrus all by itself, but iconic. Did Petrus have a recognition then anywhere near what it enjoys today?
No. First, the right bank was a little forgotten by the wine merchants in general. My father made the right bank better known as a wine merchant again, and Petrus, as well as Cheval Blanc and Ozone, let's say the three first equivalent first growth of the right bank, were not considered at all the equivalent of the 5 top chateaux from the Médoc. We had no visitors at Petrus. There was almost no interest for visiting Petrus at the time. And but I must say that being in charge of Petrus, I was conscious of the exceptional potential of Petrus, which had been proved by many top wines in the 20s already. But the terroir is unique, And when you have a unique terroir, that adaptation of the Merlot varietal to a specific bump of clay, blue clay as we call it.
When you took it over and you said you were 24, did you understand that what your father was giving you to manage was an extraordinary and singular opportunity to do something with an iconic wine. Career-wise, you hadn't earned the privilege of even managing at that time.
No, I was not conscious of it, clearly. In 71, I spent the whole year working physically myself at Petrus, because I thought that for my career, I should be able to do the job of anybody working in a vineyard, which means not only I was with the tractor, but I did as well the work of the woman, which is the most important in viticulture and most of agriculture. The men are on their tractor, it's much easier. So by working for a full vintage with my boots at Petrus, because in the vineyard, I understood that probably the fantastic potential of Petrus. And in the 70s as well, I took a decision which I didn't measure how important it would be. One morning of June 73, arriving at Petrus, I was shocked by it was just after the bloom, the potential quantity of the vintage. And I said, with that many clusters, we cannot produce a top vintage. And so that's when I began to crop thin, which was a scandal at the time, beyond what you can believe. I mean, I have the big anecdote that that church in Saint-Emilion, the old priest condemned me, I was there, by throwing on the soil what God has given them. And today I can say, 50 years later, that there is no top vineyard in the world which does not crop thin or green harvest, as you say. So that was a main decision I took at that time. And my father was always supportive, you see. My father was a thinker in a way, and did not come to Petrus. People think he came to Petrus often. He will come 2 or 3 times a year,
So I assume he understood what he was doing and had trust and faith in you. He gave you a portfolio of properties, but among them was one of the truly great properties of the world. And you actually ran it for 40 years.
Yes, almost.
38 years.
38 years, yes.
When did you learn that someday Petrus would be inherited by your brother? Because I'm assuming that when you heard it, after giving half your life to it, it's something that broke your heart.
Not at all. Very few people know, but the truth is, and maybe you will be the first one to know it officially, Petrus had been given to my brother before I began to work at Petrus in 70.
Oh my God, I never knew that.
So, people don't know that. This is why I was very at ease.
But were you working for your brother then or for your father?
I was working for both of them. I think they were half owners, both of them, at that time.
Your brother was older, right?
He's 1 year older, yeah. Right. And we people thought it was terrible for me when my father passed away in 2003. My brother kept. We had a very open discussion. Petrus was in. He said, "Why don't you keep it for a few more years?" I think we made a contract for 9 years, if I remember correctly. But at the end, please form young people, and that was the young Moueix, to manage Petrus after you retire, which I did. And in a way, I was almost happy to retire because I had made my time, and I think I did my best.
Okay, you've just rocked my boat.
Yeah.
So you and your brother each knew early on what you each were getting?
Yes.
What else was he getting besides Petrus versus what were you getting?
He was getting the Duclos company, which was a good, small wine merchant of top quality in Bordeaux at the time, and which my brother, with I will dare to say, as talented as my father for business, developed in a major Bordeaux company. And so that gave him time to develop his company, since he had perfect confidence in me.
And what did you get?
I got Établissement Jean-Pierre Moueix, which is a good wine merchant in Libourne, significant for the right bank at least. And I got the other estates, Trotanois, or partly Trotanois, and La Fleur Petrus and others, and a few I purchased myself.
Was it considered that you were treated equally in terms of your inheritance?
That's a difficult question, because the value of things has changed so much. But for me...
At that time?
No, at that time, first, in those poor families, like we were from Corrèze, central part of France, were to protect the small estate we had, speaking in Corrèze, the right of the firstborn was always applied. So I knew it, you know.
Yeah. Especially in France.
Especially in France, well, especially in England, let's say, but in France as well. Yeah. And if today Petrus was split between all the cousins, it will not be positive, I think. So I think my father took a good decision.
So that speaks volumes. I could never understand why, if you had all that you had in Bordeaux and Merlot, why the hell you bothered after school in Paris to go to school at UC Davis? I can get it, but then come back and start a career all over again, building a new enterprise halfway around the world. What did you need it for? What drove you to go to school there, and then to come? That was like in '68.
'68, yeah.
And then to come back 10 years later. I mean, because didn't your father call you back after school?
After school at UC Davis in '68, '69, those were great years for California, no secret. He called me back and he said, it's about time to work now. But he was positive when I registered at UC Davis to see something else. Besides, we had a very good friend in San Francisco, he's forgotten and passed long ago, Henry Berkut van der Voort. Henry van der Voort, he was a man of great quality, kind of a protector for me when I was there. So I had the best time, I must say, in California. And that opened me on the world. Because in those years we did not travel that much.
So did you spend any time in Napa, or was it all in Davis and San Francisco?
Not much time in Napa. Of course, I visited all the top chateaux. I even worked for a while at BV with André Chelichev.
When you say a while, what did you do?
During the harvest of '68, yes.
And so you went back to France.
Yes.
You got all this going on, more than most people could handle. You had a full plate. And then in the early 80s, you go back to Napa. What were you thinking?
Well, to be honest, after leaving Davis, that will look pretentious, I thought that the approach of winemaking in California was becoming too technical. And I had the idea that with a European approach, or more specifically a Bordeaux approach, we could produce wines with more refinement. That's a little tricky to say such a thing, because I had beautiful wines of California from the 40s and 50s, again, Inglenook and BV especially. But in the 70s, the approach was very technical. So I asked Bob Mondavi, who had been so friendly to me from the beginning, Bob, will you help me to find a vineyard in the 70s?
You asked him in the 70s?
Yes. I I went to visit many vineyards during my business trips to California, where I was trying to sell wine, of course, from Bordeaux. And one day, Margaret, who was such a wonderful lady, called me and said, "Christian, we may have something for you in California." I flew the next day and met the vineyard, if I can say. Visited Napanook Vineyard in Yonville, and the next day met Robin Lale, who was a co-owner of Napanook, and we made a joint venture within a few weeks. Yeah.
Now, I knew Robin because she, in the early years, worked with Bob Mondavi very closely.
Yes.
And she always had a great personality, a great attitude, very friendly, very welcoming. What was she looking to do with the vineyard, or what was the motivation for her to joint venture with you on the property?
Well, like many vineyards in California, she sold the grapes to Bob Mondavi, by the way, and so she would have been happy, and that's what happened, to produce a wine from those grapes, because she knew the potential.
So she was interested in going into the wine business?
Yes.
The bottled wine business?
Yes, absolutely.
What was the makeup of the vineyard? Because I understand that in the early days, it had a lot of Chardonnay.
Yes, Chardonnay, Syrah, all kinds of Johannesburg Riesling, 11 varietals.
But did it have any Cabernet?
It had a little bit Cabernet Sauvignon and even a little block of Merlot.
Okay, so most of the grapes that went into wine went into Inglenook Chardonnay because that's what it produced. So you did the joint venture, and then I assume, I don't know, that you ripped out and replanted Cabernet, or what did you do?
Well, clearly from tasting wines all around, and I toured, I interviewed Bob Mondavi, Joe Heights, my teacher Davis Maynard Amarin. I asked them for advice. They gave me good advice, with a lot of humor for Joe Heights, I remember. No surprise. Then it was clear that Cabernet Sauvignon was the varietal for Napa Valley. So I replanted slowly to Cabernet Sauvignon.
Slowly?
Mostly.
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 What about your baby, Merlot?
Yeah, I brought some Merlot and planted some Merlot and produced some Merlot, and at least it's difficult to say that the climate in Napa is too hot for Merlot, but at least in our range, Merlot did not perform well. So we tried a little Malbec, did not perform well, and finally, we are today, after many mistakes, probably, we are 90% Cabernet Sauvignon, 5% Cabernet Franc, which brings finesse, and 5% Petit Verdot, which was a surprise. I was not familiar with Petit Verdot, and it brings spiciness to the wine.
And at some point, you bought her out.
Yes.
What caused you to buy? What caused her to sell?
Probably, I like to be honest. I think there were two different events. I did not like the vintage 93, and I declassified it completely. And it was my decision. You see, I had the right in our agreement to take any technical decision.
Right.
And I must say it was brutal for them.
Yeah.
And then we had a small disagreement, and I'm still on very good terms with Robin. I like her profoundly.
She's a very special lady.
She's fantastic. And don't forget, she had a sister. Right. She still has a sister, Marcia.
I didn't know her. I knew Robin very well.
Who was very neutral in the business and very sweet and very. She loves poetry, and we got along very well.
By the way, Robin's been on the cover of Wine Spectator.
Yes.
Many years ago.
Yes. No, Robin is fantastic. But we needed to build a winery once we were contract crushing for many years with Decoron. No, sorry, with Romboer. With Romboer, sorry. With Romboer, who was very kind, Colonel Senior. But we needed a winery. And that's where we had a small disagreement because John, her husband, who was a very nice man, was an architect, classic architect for Napa. And I had really envisioned a modern building. And that was so between the fact declassifying the 93, which was my decision, a little brutal again, and the desire to have a young architect, that's when she decided to
So what I'm concluding is that it would require a significant investment from her to maintain her interest going forward if you're going to build a winery on the footsteps of having 1993 where there was basically no crop and no cash flow.
It's probably their approach, but I think in the meantime, she was dreaming of a venture on her own. To produce her own wine. She had got, she had experience of the vineyard, she had got experience of the winemaking, and she took a young winemaker whom we had trained ourselves, and she began to be...
When did you go from being a visitor, tourist, flying back and forth, to establishing roots? Because I understand you have a beautiful home in Napa Valley now, and you spend half your life, which we're going to get into. When did you decide that you needed to be there for extensive periods of time? And how did that affect your responsibilities in Bordeaux?
Well, first, let me tell you, we had a great team in Bordeaux and a great team in California. That was essential. And I was, flying between the two teams. I am a hard worker. That would be the only quality which I would accept as a compliment. So that, and I am a micromanager, which means, for instance, I follow today, being in New York, what happens in Bordeaux. And when I am in Bordeaux, I follow daily, still by fax. Every morning, I follow what happens to, and I call them in the evening, what happens in California. So that to say, I have a kind of a double life, clearly.
And obviously you have to have very, very talented, dedicated people
on
both sides,
yes.
Or you couldn't do what you do without.
Very much so. And they communicate together and they get along well, which is not always
So
easy.
when did you, quote unquote, move to Napa?
No, I really, well, the big step is, of course, when I bought out my partners.
Right.
And then we built the winery with the Swiss architects Herzog and de Meuron, who were advised by my wife, Cherise. And we built that winery in 97. And then, of course, it was, even if it was not very expensive at the time, it was a statement, architectural, and for me, taking a position in the valley. So that's when I began to spend more time in the valley. And but still spending most of my time in France, about 2/3 in France, 1/3 in California.
Is that true today?
That's still true today. Yes.
So what months do you spend in France versus
It varies a little bit depending upon the season, depending upon holidays in France. For instance, in May in France, we are on holidays almost full time, half of the month at least. So I'm always in California in May, then I return in July, then just before the harvest, early September, and after the wine experience, second part of October. So I commute 5 to 6 times a year.
You mentioned the wine experience. My recollection is, we've been doing it for 40-something years. I don't think you've ever missed a year.
Yeah. We love it, we love it. Yeah. It's we see old friends, and we love the wine experience.
Your life is so multifaceted that I'm frustrated, in asking you. I have so many different things on my mind, but let's jump back to Bordeaux for a few minutes. Where is the Bordeaux wine market, wine industry today? It's been through a lot of change. Some of the chateaus came out with prices for the new vintage that are substantially down. Economy, demand, what's going on?
Okay, I'm glad you asked me the question today. Right. Because if you had asked me 1 year ago, where we had the 22 vintage, great vintage at crazy prices, I would have been very at ease. Today, I am at ease. Why? There's been for the past 5 years, and it's partly the fault of Bordeaux, the Bordeaux bashing. Bordeaux bashing has been completely exaggerated by all people in some wine writers, I'm sorry to say.
What is Bordeaux bashing?
Bordeaux bashing, Bordeaux is criticize everything we do will be wrong, or we are too expensive, the wines are not as good as we pretend. I mean, the wines are polluted by the chemicals we use. All of this is wrong.
Okay.
Except probably that we were too expensive. We are. And same thing for Napa. You know, for me, and just between brackets, the wines are too expensive. We are asked today, we are told, the young people don't drink red wine anymore. And they find the alcohol, this, that, a good reason. The reason, the wines are too expensive. I mean, in any restaurant, you cannot have top wines, I saw it last night, for less than $800. And makes no sense. Difficult for us already, impossible for a young man. So the main problem for the wines today, and especially Bordeaux, prices. If the prices go down, so that's why we are so happy that we took consciousness of that in Bordeaux, especially this year, due to the difficult market.
Or they think that by lowering the price significantly, roughly 25-30%, that will open the market to more people that can afford it, which will provide positive results.
I'm convinced of that. It will take a few years, 2-3 years, until the vintage arrives on the market. But I think that the interest will be renewed. I'm really optimistic on that. Because Bordeaux, I mean, there is no wine like Bordeaux in the world. The refinement of the top chateaux of Bordeaux is, we cannot reach anywhere else. I do my best in Napa to get more refinement, but the climate does not allow.
So the producers of Bordeaux are actively engaged in supporting and developing the world market for Bordeaux, which had been extraordinarily successful for many, many years. And what specifically do they need to do to regain the position and put demand ahead of supply as it always had been?
Well, the big move we are just seeing today, I think should be enough, as long as next year, if the market is a little better, we don't increase by 20%. We have been unreasonable for many years. It's partly due to the fact that we have produced great vintages 8 years out of 10 now. Global warming will probably be back on that. But Bordeaux has exaggerated its prices, and by reducing the prices drastically, I think we should be able to conquer the market again.
All right, but let me be a little bit of a devil's advocate.
Yes, please.
Burgundy's prices are crazy.
They will pay. They will pay.
Italy has many chateaus that are $700 to $1,000 or more. California, what do you think of the pricing of the cult wines of California, of which there are a wide number, and the productions are not tiny anymore?
Yes, they are small, let's say, because I think that any chateau who produces, let's say, reasonably 5,000 cases cannot afford those crazy prices. So there are really boutique wines, those very expensive wines. I'm not critical of the quality.
Yeah.
I'm critical of the prices. I mean, but
No, but
are they drunk?
Do you think, looking at the band of luxury wines,
Yes.
let's say all wines over $500 a bottle, no matter what country they're from, are they all equally faced with pushback from the consumer, from the collector, or is it a very selective situation?
You mean 500 in the stores, in the stores or in restaurants?
Either. I mean, the person who's buying a $25 bottle of wine is not the same person who goes to a restaurant or in a retail store, pays $500 or $1,000 for a bottle of Macedo or Heroin or,
let me tell you.
Romani Conti, for Christ's sake.
We are all at fault along the line. I was recently in Belgium. I went to a restaurant which practices multiplied the price by 2. Mm. The restaurant was full. There were 1 or 2 bottles of wine on each table, you saw. When the restaurants multiply by 5, don't expect them to sell. We look for inexpensive wine, even me. So we should all along that line correct our margins. That's that's essential. That does not answer exactly your question.
No, but it's something which is on the mind of most wine lovers. Once they've had a great bottle of wine, they get hooked. And the question is, at what point, there are a certain number of collectors, but beyond that, when you go out to dinner and you look at the wine list, it doesn't matter how rich you are, you look at, you gasp. Because they do mark them up from whatever they paid for them.
Yeah.
Merlot. Obviously, you have achieved much with that grape. Tell me about Merlot in California. Is it that it's lost its way, it's never had its way, the climate, the soil will never produce it, it's not being vinified? What is the problem, if there is a problem, with Merlot in California from a Merlot expert from Pomerol?
Well, it's a very delicate question because I can honestly judge Merlot at Napanook Ranch, which I know by heart. I even tried the different soils of the ranch, and Merlot was not a good fit. Nevertheless, I have tasted a few good Merlots in California and in Napa. Sometimes, there was a confusion between Merlot and Cabernet Franc in the past, including at UC Davis. So maybe some of those Merlots, are they pure Merlots? The Duckhorn made the famous Merlot. 3 pounds.
Who would you recommend people to try of a Merlot that you think that has been produced successfully in California?
I would avoid Merlot. I never drink Merlots.
All right, so you're...
I'm sorry, but...
All right, I get it. So, mentors. Who were your mentors in Bordeaux? Obviously, your father.
Mm-hmm.
Was your father a businessman or a winemaker? Did he know how to make wine?
Yes, but he knew how to find good winemakers for him. No, my father was a rather distant man.
Yeah.
And first, as you probably know, he was a big art collector. So he had really 2 passions in his life, wine and art, and mostly paintings. So that took at least half of his time, probably, I think.
What motivated and caused him to become interested in wine and an avid collector? I mean, of art.
It's a pity you didn't meet my father, because he was a very impressive man, the kind of volume of General de Gaulle, like that. Very generous, very warm, even if he looked a little distant at first. To summarize, he had a sense of quality. He will find the quality between those two posters. He would say, this one is much better than this one. He had an eye and something for the wine. No. He was looking for the potential of aging. And I have seen some examples, unbelievable.
Right, but art. What caused him to be so interested in art?
He had absolutely no. My grandparents were very modest in their lifestyle. He bought Monet when he was 18 years old. Without
How do you know?
He had a feeling. And I said, "Yeah, but how could you?" But mon petit, it was worth nothing again.
Yeah. We were talking about mentors. Your father. Who were some of your mentors in Bordeaux or in France?
In Bordeaux, there was a generation of great people, including my father, Philippe de Rothschild, obviously, and then Philippine, but I remember Philippe in that generation. Alexis Lichine, he was a character as well. These people were very inspiring. And Émile Pénaud at a certain level. I knew him a little too late. And so those people were very inspiring. Probably we don't have the same caliber today in Bordeaux, or maybe people are less communicative in a way. So that was, but my mentors were mostly in California, finally. And I would say that they had more influence on me, Bob Mondavi first, wonderful memories with Bob, and many, many wonderful.
So how did you meet Bob? Did you meet Andre first or Bob first?
Same time when I was at UC Davis, yeah, same time.
But Andre gave you a job, Bob didn't.
Yeah. Andre, the day before I signed with my partners, May 7, 82, I had lunch with Andre, and that's a wonderful story, and his charming wife, Dorothy. And he said, Andre, will you go to a joint venture in Napa if you were in my position? He would say, yes, Christian, you will be successful. Okay, under one condition. And he went to find a little toy, which was with two little plastic shoes with a rubber. And he said, if you move slowly, you will have success. That was his advice. And very precious advice, I can tell you. And then the night before I signed, I had dinner with Maynard Amrine. We had become very good friends. We were not good friends at the origin because he was so California-minded that I was defending Bordeaux. And Maynard Amrine made Inglenook 52, 53, 55 against Petrus 52, 53, 55 in the blind testing. And it ended, we were 6 people testing, it ended equality. So he said, Christian, you can go, the best terroirs of California.
No. What was the outcome of the comparison between the two?
If I remember correctly, Petrus won in 52, lost in 53, and equal in 55. So it was equal.
Maynard Amrine, I got to know well. He was a brilliant man, very dedicated. There was a whole crew from Davis. Albert Winkler.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, Robert. I'm thinking Andre.
Well,
Maynard, Robert, and Andre were all Distinguished Service Award winners over the years from The Spectator. It flashed in my head when you mentioned Alexis Lichine. He and I spent a week together in Napa Valley in 1974. Don't ask me. But it was one of the funniest weeks of my life.
I'm not surprised. He had such a sense of humor.
Such a character. He really was a total bon vivant. That when you're with him, all you do is laugh, and not for today, but someday I have great stories to tell about him. Tell me about Dominus. When was your first release?
The first release, well, in a way with you, the first vintage, let's put it that way, was 83. Yeah. I made a few mistakes because in France with the Merlot, we add frequently the press. And I made the same thing in 83, which was already a tannic vintage. So the wine was so tannic that when we were supposed to release it in 86, gosh, the wine was so hard, I was embarrassed. And a few days before, I decided to launch the 84 rather than the 83. That was a very poor start. But that's last time I made the cover of the Wine Spectator. I have a...
When did this?
Yeah, and you see, it's
1986.
Yeah, so I have the 83 vintage, and in fact, it's not true. I released the 84 and not the 83. You see, so that was a very bad start, I must say.
So and my recollection was that for the genius of Petrus to launch this wine from Napa, it didn't get off to a very positive.
Oh, definitely.
And so what was going? So the first 3-5 years, did you say to yourself, "What a mistake I made," or "What am I doing," or "What's going to happen," or "Where's my investment"?
No. I don't like the word investment. For me, it was a love story, honestly, and I'm never in a rush. I always consider you need 20 years to understand the vineyard. Today we have Ulysses, which...
I'm glad you said that. You are quoted in something I read as saying it takes 20 years to make a great wine.
Absolutely. I was not in a hurry. I knew the early years would be made with mistakes. I have no recipe. I hate the word recipe. I saw so many wines we are made with a recipe. That's not my approach. Each vintage is different.
You didn't lose heart?
Not at all.
But you knew you were struggling.
My partners were very nice to me.
So how, around what year did you think you're finally getting it right and you're getting closer and closer to where you want to go?
91. I was so happy. It was only 10 years and not the 20 years planned. Because honestly, when I made the joint venture with my partners, the first sentence, I need 20 years to produce a good wine. And the second sentence, I will produce wine without irrigation. That was essential for me. And I admire my partners to have been confident in a young man who says, I need 20 years.
When did you feel that Dominus had achieved your goal?
Much more recently. Probably the best vintage we produced, I would say today, was 2013. Yeah, so now I'm confident, except that the climatic conditions are changing. Maybe the peak, we have passed the peak, I don't know. I am not in a hurry, but not at all, even at my age.
How many cases do you produce today?
We produce an average of 5,000 to 7,000 cases. A peak in the big vintages at 10,000.
And what is the retail recommended retail price?
In recent years, it's around $300. I'm happy at that level. Each time we discuss with our distributor, I ask them, should I lower the price to help? For me...
In 2021, you got Wine of the Year for the 2018 vintage. And I know one of the things that was in your favor, and I don't remember what it was, what was the price of the 2018? Because you were selling it, it was not only a great wine, but a great value.
Yes.
Do you remember what the price was?
I'm not quite sure. I would have said 180, something like that. Yeah.
For a Napa Cabernet, And I think you got like 97 points. It's quite spectacular.
Yeah. You mean it was reasonable?
Yeah.
I know at one point there were 100 wines in Napa more expensive than Dominus. That makes me happy, you know. That proves that normal people can afford Dominus. That's my goal.
So, where were you, and who told you that you had gotten Wine of the Year?
Oh, that came as a huge surprise. I was in France, and I got a call from our manager in California, great manager, Julia Levitan, and she called me and she said, we had many calls this morning. We were wondering why, and all of a sudden we learned that we were Wine of the Year. So it was 8 a.m. in California and 5 p.m. for us, so it was an evening. And we did open a good bottle on that night.
And then, what was it like the first week?
Well, of course, we were happy. We were not bragging about it.
Well, you don't brag about anything. You're one of the most low-key people I've ever met in my life.
Not today.
But today, you brought your game today.
No, we told our team in France, and on the first occasion when we were in California, we celebrated. And we celebrated with our workers. It's so essential. You know, we have very good teams in France. I mean, the workers in the vineyards. In California, they are sensational. You know, they work so well. So we always share the good news, share the good wines. And for me, and I don't know if you will ask a question, but I like our... I didn't use the word happiness. I like all the people who work for us, either in France or in California, to be happy. That's essential. And even that will be my philosophy about producing wines. Wines is to make people happy. And that's why I don't like the wines when they are too expensive, because it's not happiness anymore. And I think that 21 Dominus, which you selected this morning, is showing pretty well, and will make a lot of people happy, because wine is a message somewhere, you see.
So I'm sure you've had a lot of great older Bordeaux wines. Do you have any recollections of California Cabernets that you've had over the years?
Oh, yes. Yes. I was... Well, lucky, of course, to have not so many, but many old Inglenoks, either with Robin or previously. It was really, as I said, a little bit with Martini, all Martinis, but mostly between, as I said earlier, between Inglenook and BV. They were the great ones.
Any vintage stand out?
The BV 68, I have a soft spot for it because I was there.
Yeah. You picked the grapes.
It's almost a joke. But
what's the oldest Inglenook you had?
The oldest what?
Inglenook.
I would say 41 probably.
You had 41.
Yeah, I had 41.
And how was it?
The 40s were beautiful at Inglenook. The wines were the vines were not irrigated at the time, and that changes everything. The roots have to find humidity. They go deeper, and they express the terroir much more.
I don't know. I wasn't going to tell you because I assumed you never had one. I'm going to serve you a 41 at lunch tonight.
No.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
But it's 83 years old. I'm not promising it's going to be alive, but I thought, what a great experiment to share it, because I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that the grapes from that wine may be partly from Napa, the vineyard you own.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but in fact, from what I understood, John Daniel bought Napa Nook only in 43. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
So maybe I won't serve you.
Yes. Do serve it.
I have old BVs too. I don't think I have 68 here. I think I have some, but not here. But we can figure out a vintage. But I myself, I haven't had a 41 in like 30 years. I only have a few bottles.
Thank you for sharing.
Directly from from England. So, are there any other, like over the last 20 years, mentors or buddies in Napa, in the wine world?
Well, probably I don't go out that much.
Cool.
I'm long-time friend with Warren Winiarski because
Yeah.
I love the people who know what they are doing,
Yeah.
which is not always the case in the wine world. I love Paul Draper, but it's not Napa, but Paul, he's a
Paul's
think.
an incredible guy. Also a distinguished service award winner,
Yeah.
as
Well,
you are.
Yeah. So I don't go out that much, anymore, I would say, for different reasons. But I'm on good relationship with most people, I think.
Yeah.
But we first, the age is there, and so we live a rather quiet life.
What wines do you like to drink at home?
In France, you mean?
Both, either.
Well, as I said, we drink in California Stag's Leap, sometimes Opus. We are in a very close relationship with Opus, and sometimes some of those big wines. Problem is, I love...
You drink mainly Cabernet?
Mainly Cabernet. Yeah.
How about Pinot Noir?
Almost never.
Huh?
Almost never. Never from California, which is probably a mistake.
Well, I think I'm going to serve you a Pinot Noir at lunch today.
Okay, with pleasure.
One of the great challenges, what do I serve you for lunch? I mean, I can go in 20 different directions, and now I'm waffling on what I'm going to serve you. And what are you drinking in Bordeaux?
In Bordeaux, there is such I drink Montrose for the Médoc quite often, and on our side, I love Cheval Blanc and Aubryon. Those the two elegant
Do you
wines.
drink any white wines?
Yes. Well, I drink Aubryon Blanc, of course, and a lot of whites from Burgundy. Very few whites from Bordeaux.
Is there anything that I missed that later I'm going to regret or you're going to regret in terms of what's going on in your world?
No, the important thing, honestly, is Bordeaux is back. That's a very important message, and we need support. I told James recently when he was in Bordeaux, James Mothworth, we need more support from the wine spectator. I know there are some difficulties. Forget the difficulties. Yeah. We need your support, as you have done for so many years. Yeah.
Well, we do cover Bordeaux quite extensively, but we have had issues with the first growths.
I know.
They used to send us their wine. Now they only want us to go to the chateaus to taste the wine. And we tell them we can't do that because we're not tasting wine. We don't do that for anybody else. And we're at an impasse. And I've spoken privately to them, and I told them that that's not our charter. We only taste wine. And they're being stubborn, and I don't mind saying it publicly. But we cover, James spends a few weeks. We cover very comprehensively the region and the different producers and so forth. We don't include the first growths in our tastings anymore because they're not cooperating with us. But we still are very, Bordeaux is a very important wine region to us as journalists, and that's reflected the fact that there are many consumers who drink and enjoy drinking Bordeaux. I mean, you brought it up. I didn't bring it up.
No.
I'm not going to back away from, I've said to one of the owners that, in my lifetime, it's never going to change. So, you have to make a decision. We want to taste your wines very, very much, but I don't know what caused you to change your mind, but you're not helping yourselves and you're not helping our reader.
Yeah, but this difficult situation in Bordeaux today, where the top chateaus are reacting, is maybe an opening. I think you are a great diplomat. You should take one more step to try to arrange that. I think they may be more receptive.
Well, I've spoken to them, and the ball is really in their court. I called them, and I've been on the phone, not in recent months, but extensively, to try and sort. It's the only pocket of resistance that we have in the wine world.
Yeah.
And there's no reason for it.
Yeah.
And it's not of our making. We had a great working relationship that they changed like 3 years ago. What was behind that change, I can't tell you, but it is what it is. If they read the interview, if they watch the video, they should know that the wine spectator would give nothing more than to be able to taste the first gross of Bordeaux, but are only going to taste them blind. And they have to go back to the prior procedures and understand that they put us in a difficult position. Yeah. We're not going to start tasting after over 40 years, not going to start to taste wines where we know what they are, when we rate them. Just not going to happen.
Yeah. Very clear position, but
let's go on some positive. Yeah. Why don't you talk about your son?
Yes.
Who I don't think I've ever met.
Edward, I think he came only once to the wine experience.
But I understand he's your right hand.
Very much so, yeah.
In Bordeaux, is he also involved in California?
Not directly in the production, because we have a good team and it's just one vineyard.
So tell me about Edward.
Edward was born in 1977, so he's not a really young man anymore. Yeah. He loves business more than I love business myself. Yeah. Yeah. So under my management, the company was developing vineyards, acquiring a few more vineyards, but not developing the business itself. Because as he jokes, he said, "Dad, you purchase only the wines you like." Yeah. And since I don't like all the wines, it was a little limited. So he has developed the business very seriously for the past few years. We are now among the big players of Bordeaux, all included, which we were not before. And he's doing very well. He pays a lot of attention to the wines from the Médoc. He visits the growers.
How old is he?
He is 47 already. So.
Bring him to a wine experience.
Yes.
I'd love to meet him.
Good. Yeah.
And you have a daughter?
I have a daughter. She's 45, and she lives in South Africa. She's a wildlife vet. Big girl, very little tomboy.
Where in South Africa?
She's based in Bloemfontein, because it's not a very attractive town, but that's more central for her missions all around South Africa. She has become a quite famous vet, and now she has missions everywhere in Africa. Even last week it was in Jordania. So she loves her life. I hope I will attract her to California. I don't see her back in Bordeaux because life is a little too steady. But I hope to attract her to California.
And what about your right hand, Cherise?
Cherise.
How long you been married? I know that she's with you all the time. Tell me about her.
We have been married for 30 years. Yeah. She played a very important role in my life, especially on the art side. She's our art advisor. Yeah. She was the one to introduce me to Herzog and de Meuron. Yeah. Herzog and de Meuron have built for us the winery at Dominus, then our private residence in California, where you are invited anytime, a little cabin at Ulysses, in France, a refectory for the harvesters, and very recently, a big winery for Bel Air Monange.
I was told about it. I'm so very modern, quite spectacular.
Probably, yes.
And I hope when we do the story, we put a picture, because I've never been there. It's new, and it's supposed to be extraordinary.
I'm not in the position to say it's a beautiful winery. Yeah. It took 7 years to build with the COVID in the middle, but it's worth a visit. Yes, and the wines are promising as well, because they are very classic wines of Saint-Emilion.
Well, she seems to me, and I've known her for many years, not well, but a charming and supportive partner to you.
Yeah, she's definitely a great support for me. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
So I always ask the final question. And I even asked the Werner Scout going back many years, but in each interview. So when the great book on wine is written and published 50 or 100 years from now, it's going to alphabetically have a name for each of the people in the wine world. And you're going to be dead.
50 years.
Long after you've come and gone. And under the name Christian Moueix, what would you like it to say?
Trying to get the best of two worlds. He tried to get the best of two worlds.
He tried to get the best of two worlds.
Without achieving much.
I am so grateful.
No, just the reverse.
I was a little bit skeptical because you are so private. You are extremely humble man that I have nothing but the utmost respect for in the 40 years we've known each other, or longer, 50 years, because I met you really in the 70s. I had no idea how forthcoming you would be, and you've been open, and I learned a great deal, and I know that the Wine Spectator reader is going to enjoy hearing your story. In the issue, we'll have a lot of background on the properties you own and different things about your life, but this is much more interesting because this is the stuff you don't really get to know. And
well, some of the questions I have never answered before.
Well, I think people are afraid to ask you. Anything final that you want to say?
No, that wine is wonderful. I mean, to do a job like, it's not a job, a passion like producing wines, and again, to make people happy, people we never met, they will drink a good bottle of wine, whether it's California or Bordeaux, never mind, and that will make their evening, as long as they can afford it again. What a joy, what a joy. Yeah, I really love it.
You were so good that I am going to serve the 41 English
thank you.
at lunch.
Thank you.
And maybe I'll pick out I have BVs in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. We'll see what we can come up. And we'll do a wine tasting at lunch.
With pleasure.
All right. Thank you again.
No, thank you. Thank you for, well, you have clearly a talent for asking the right questions. And I really enjoyed it. I think it was clear. Yes.
No publication covers the world of wine as completely as Wine Spectator, featuring exclusive interviews with winemaking's living legends and the world's finest chefs. Each issue of Wine Spectator magazine takes readers to the world's greatest vineyards and most interesting dining destinations. Most important, Wine Spectator rates and reviews thousands of wines each year. With an incredible database of over 400,000 wine reviews, Wine Spectator's editors guide you to the highest quality wines as well as the world's best values. There's a reason Wine Spectator is the world's most widely read wine magazine. Take your wine enjoyment to greater heights and subscribe today at winespectator.com.